Hi everyone, I'm Ashlyn, founder of the Plant Swap group, and I'm excited to be bringing you and presenting this information today. I just completed my Texas Master Composters course, taught by Melissa Zamora and funded by various local organizations. So this talk will just kind of be like an introduction. We do go a little bit in depth. And it's just in the beginning going to be a little bit dry because we're going to go over some statistics that I feel like is important to know just because it relates to why we should compost. So thank you for being here and thank you for listening. So what is compost? Compost is a nutrient-rich medium produced from natural aerobic decomposition. This is that dark, crumbly, moist, earthy smell medium that you get from composting. There are many benefits, such as reducing landfill waste, improving our water quality, supporting biodiversity, conserving non-renewable energy resources, replenishing organic matter to the soil. It buffers against toxins in the soil, can mitigate climate change, and is beneficial to everybody. And there's plenty more benefits to composting. So when you throw something away, where does it go? Well, it goes to the landfill. And as you will see in the following slides, our waste generation is increasing and it calls for change. In 2018, the EPA reported 292.4 million tons of municipal solid waste was generated by the US alone. This number does not include materials such as construction and demolition debris, municipal wastewater sludge, and non-hazardous industrial waste, which may also end up in our landfills. Of the 292.4 million tons of municipal solid waste, only 25 million tons were composted at a local level, and 17.7 million tons managed in other ways. And so here we're looking at the historical data in which our waste generation has increased between the years of 1960 to 2018, again provided by the EPA. And so we just have highlighted here some of those materials that could be composted. Paper and paperboard made the largest generation of material of waste. And although we have seen a decline in newspaper and magazine production due to those items being digitized, that amount of waste still continues to increase. Food waste is the fourth largest material generation, with yard trimmings following behind as the fifth largest. It's also worth noting that legislation has impacted discouraging disposing yard trimmings into landfills since 1990, which has led to source reduction measures. From the 292.4 million tons municipal solid waste, it was calculated by removing 94 million tons that were recycled and composted, 17.7 million tons which were managed by other food management methods, and the 35 million tons combusted with energy recovery, that we were left with the 146.1 million tons of waste making it into our landfills. So of this waste, we could have composted theoretically a little over half of it. Our limitation being that these materials were not assessed for the acceptability to be composted, which we will cover later. Looking at food waste data from 2019, 66 million tons of food waste was distributed as follows, with approximately 50% of this waste ending up in landfills. And this is the historical data of food waste when we're looking between 1960 and 2019, with a fraction of that going to composting, as you can see here in yellow. So if compost renews the soil, then why is it bad sending it to the landfill? Well, compostable material in a landfill becomes compacted and contaminated with its surrounding waste. So then rather than becoming allowing it to naturally decompose and becoming a renewable resource, it essentially just becomes waste as well. And this is just a little graphic to show you what a constructed landfill looks like, and how that it's all contained via these different layers that are added. So before getting to composting, ways that we can manage our waste, this was provided by the EPA, and they had noted that it is in the process of review, possibly making changes to it. So the first thing we can do is reducing source reduction and reusing materials. Second to that would be recycling and composting. And then the last two being energy recovery, treatment, and disposal. Going back to reducing the source, that would, be within the realms of buying less, repurposing materials, buying eco-friendly, biodegradable, feed the hungry, feed people, feed animals, before we start getting down to these other ways of disposal. So now that we understand why we should compost, let's get into composting. The mechanisms of decomposition. Compost should attract aerobic bacteria to aid in the decomposition of your pile. This is important because when we're looking at landfill is utilizing anaerobic bacteria, which is attracted to the absence of free oxygen. So then you end up with this stinky, slow way of decomposition, and it does not support your fungi or macro or microorganisms. So knowing the difference can help you later down the road, especially with troubleshooting your piles. These are some of the decomposers that will be attracted to your compost pile. They are beneficial, all good for our soil and our compost piles. So this may be taken into consideration when deciding where you want to place a compost bin or where you want to place your compost pile. Physical decomposers can help break down material by grinding and chewing and shredding materials into smaller pieces for microscopic organisms to break down. Humans and animals are even participating in this cycle by physically breaking down these materials so that way they can be used by these smaller macro and microorganisms. And so we'll cover just a few of these. Bacteria is a primary decomposer that heats up your compost pile, allowing you to, or allowing your pile to go through the appropriate stages of decomposition. Bacteria prefer green organic matter. Bacteria can go dormant if conditions are not suitable. So again, this is just another way that you can help troubleshoot your pile if you're not getting to those appropriate stages, which we'll talk about later. Actinomycetes are a type of free-living bacterium that are responsible for the earthy smell of the soil, and they produce antibiotics that end in mycin. And they also resemble fungi. So we've got pictures of those here, and then a couple of fun facts about bacteria on the side. And protozoa, they help release nutrients and form readily available nutrition to plants and balance the population of bacteria. Nematodes, they feed on other organisms found in soil and compost piles, mineralize nutrients, release nitrogen, and support bacteria and fungi. Important to learn about all of these guys because it also ties into planning where you want to put your compost pile. As you can see, I have a troubleshooting section down here. As we know that some nematodes can be bad for your garden. So a natural way to help deal with that if you have accidentally put your compost pile too close to the garden is that you can use soil solarization, which is briefly discussed here. Fungi are also primary decomposers. They create a vast underground network that mutually benefit plants and improve soil structure. Mushrooms are just the fruiting bodies of these underground networks designed to disperse spores. It is also worth noting the symbiotic relationships between fungi and plants is one of the reasons why the no-till method is so important, as this can destroy the mycorrhizae networks as well as other vital networks of the soil food web. And I've just got some pictures here. We've got the hyphae, as well as our mycorrhizae. You can see its connection to the plant. And then we've got our fruiting bodies, which most people think of when we talk about fungi, which are just like, as I mentioned, the fruit of these underground networks. And then we get into arthropods. So that covers a wide range of insects, arachnids, our centipedes, millipedes, pill bugs, sow bugs. They can be on the microscopic or the macroscopic level. And they help with shedding organic material, allowing for other decomposers to further break down these materials. They also are beneficial in transporting microbes and aerating the soil. And then slugs and snails, like those love-hate relationship. They're wonderful for compost piles, but maybe not so much in the garden. So you want to be sure to keep some distance between your garden and your compost pile. Should you have trouble with them venturing over to your garden, there's some solutions I've listed here, such as the beer trap, diatomaceous earth. You can also encircle your bed or your plants with copper, and that just gives them a little electrical shock so they don't want to travel any further than that. And some other options over here. So flies are another beneficial decomposer attracted to the odor of food scraps or a pile that may have become anaerobic. So if these populations become bothersome, that may be a sign that there's something going on with your pile that needs to be fixed. So you can troubleshoot that by adding in some more browns, turning that pile, making sure that you're adding in that aeration to it, so that way you're attracting the right bacteria to help your pile decompose the way we want it to. Compost should never smell. So if they're attracted to odor, then something, there's something going on. And make sure that when you're adding in your food scraps that you're putting in the center of your piles, as that will help deter a lot of these problems. And now we'll talk about our types of composting that we can do. So we've got hot piles that requires a little bit more maintenance, but it's going to give you a better output. It's also faster, and it helps destroy weeds, seeds, and pathogens. Our cold pile is what I like to call the lazy method. So if composting sounds intimidating to you, then this is a great option to get started. And so that's little to no maintenance, but it's going to take a little bit longer before you get your finished compost, and you're going to have a reduced volume with that one. Your vermicomposting, so that can be adapted to indoors. It's great for if you have an apartment or just a small space, not much outdoor room, or maybe you want to add that into doing one of these other two. So that is when we're using worms to help us compost. And it's great because then you get castings. So the ideal size for your hot composting is going to be 3 by 3 feet, though it can be larger. The ideal ratio is 3 parts brown material or carbon and 1 part nitrogen, which is your green material. Later we'll discuss what all goes into those different materials. So for the scope of this talk, we will not be covering the varying ratios of various brown materials, but if that is of interest to you, then I would highly recommend reading more into that. So this type of pile needs to be turned every 2 weeks or more often, depending on what material is added. When starting a pile, it is best to have material ready, especially helpful if you have a pile of browns. And then you can also do buckets or takeout containers and a refrigerator, or just like a little compost bucket, maybe in your kitchen. But have that material ready before you start building your pile. Upon starting your pile, you want to mix it, top it with brown material to deter pests or rodents, and then mixing that all up. And then you want to moisten your pile. You'll know when there's enough water when the water starts to run off the bottom of that pile. And then watering the pile should be done as often as needed to keep it moist, and after each turning. So to conserve water, you may want to plan to put your pile in the shade, or maybe with like a cover top or a lid on it. The first stage of composting is a short phase, and this is the phase that's going to start that decomposition. If you need to troubleshoot your pile during this phase, such as adding more material to meet that 3-to-1 ratio, you may do so. Keeping the pile moist like a wrung out sponge will also allow bacteria to thrive. This phase usually lasts a few days, so if you notice that your pile is not progressing to that next stage, then that would be signs that something's going on with your pile and you may want to look into it. So for instance, if you're not keeping it moist, then you're not allowing that bacteria to thrive to get to that point. You may not have enough green material to allow that bacteria to thrive to get to the next stage. So then we move on to the next phase, which is the thermophilic stage. And this will give rise to temperatures that get up to 150 to 160 degrees Fahrenheit. And so this is our phase that helps destroy human and animal pathogens such as E. coli and Salmonella, gets rid of the seeds from weeds, and gets rid of plant pathogens. You can monitor this with a thermometer to make sure that your compost pile is progressing. At this point, you would not want to add any more material as long as it is progressing through those appropriate stages. You may also notice that during this time that your pile is giving off steam, which is normal due to the high temperatures. In the winter months, you may need to take extra steps to insulate your compost pile, depending on weather conditions and where you are located. After thermophilic stage, we go into the curing stage, which is when your temperatures are starting to decrease, and this takes just a few weeks. Fungi may be observed while the pH is alkaline. Materials, again, should not be added, and you're returning back to the mesophilic organisms that are thriving in this pile, so you're getting down to like the 100 to 104 degree Fahrenheit temperatures. Commonly grouped with the curing stage, though different, is the maturing stage. This occurs when temperatures return to a stable ambient temperature. Premature application in this phase can damage plants. It is recommended to wait 3 weeks or more. When finished, you will be left with a humus-like, dark and crumbly, musky, earth-smelling finished compost. So as you can see here, I'm holding the finished product that we were able to get our hands on and help volunteer through that master composting course with the Islander Green team that was led by Melissa Zamora at TAMCU. And then going into cold compost piles, they are easy, low maintenance, again, what I like to call the lazy method. So if the previous sounds a little intimidating to you, starting here is a great place to start. The key to the pile is assembling in a way that you can create this natural aeration, which will prevent the need to turn the pile, making it low to no maintenance. So should your assembly fail in that way, then you may end up with an anaerobic pile, which would require turning and adding more brown material to bring it back to that aerobic state. So because this method takes a lengthier time to decompose, rainwater runoff can deplete it of nutrients. In addition, the end product is much smaller volume. However, this is still producing a renewable resource and preventing landfill waste. Therefore, still a great option if this appeals to you. And as with previous method, the pile is finished when it becomes that humus-like, dark, crumbly, and smells of musky earth. And then switching gears to our final one, going to vermicomposting. This is a great option for those with limited outdoor space, so could even be adapted for indoor use. You can find containers online, or you may choose the do-it-yourself route. Either way, you'll want to layer 4 to 5 inches of bedding, which may be composed of any of the following: shredded paper, finished compost, cocoa coir, manure, or brown leaves. So you dampen the mixture, but use caution not to waterlog the material. And then you can mix that all up. and then add your green material, appropriate portions, not more than what your worms can eat. And then you can even get some vermicomposting bins, such as the one shown, that capture the liquids and allow you to use worm compost tea for your plants. So selecting your earthworms. We'll go through a couple of different types of earthworms. These are going to be your most common and recommended composting worms to use. They recommend 1 pound for 1 square foot of compost. Most websites that you go to, worm breeders will have a calculator to determine how many worms you need to order. They do reproduce quickly, so in time you may decide to start another vermicompost. You could add it to an outdoor pile, share with your friends, or even make a business of it. And then just a fun fact, that did you know that 1,000 red or brandlers can increase to 1 million in 1 to 2 years? I mean, some fast reproduction. And so here we have red earthworms, or red-headed worms. They're also suitable for compost piles, but prefer manure. So these may be ideal in like a farm setting or a situation where you're adding a manure-rich compost pile, as that is what they prefer. As mentioned, there are many other varieties of earthworms, though not commonly recommended for composting, but rather just found naturally in the soil food webs. You will also notice the endangered species that I've included here of North America, and I just added those in to spread awareness of their existence and the vulnerability to these populations. Unlike the other options, vermicomposting can be ready in as little as 1 week. So depending on the container you've selected, harvesting the compost can be tricky. Some choose to make it a mindful practice and sift through the material to save as many worms as possible, while others may choose to remove approximately half the material with the worms included. Your consideration for that would just want to be, make sure you're not harvesting too often, so that way you're not interrupting that reproductive rate to where you are left with not enough worms. And then after harvest, replenish the bedding to 4 to 5 inches, mix it if you're choosing multiple materials, moisten it, and then continue adding green materials as needed. Again, just enough that your worms are able to eat. You don't want to add too much, or you may have problems with pest or smell. And then my tip for that would just be never let your worms dry out or they will die. Okay, let's get into what is classified as green material. So green material is rich in nitrogen and it breaks down quickly, providing quick heat to your pile. It also has a lot of moisture to it. So here are a list of items that are considered green material. We have a variety: food scraps, plant trimmings, coffee grounds, tea bags, seaweed, hair, nail clippings, and I'm sure there's plenty more that aren't on this list. Our brown materials are rich in carbon. They break down more slowly. They are dry and provide structure and aeration to your pile. So those are things like your leaves, straw, sawdust, cotton fabric, twigs, nutshells, pine cones, wine corks, and again, I'm sure there's more that aren't on the list. Materials to avoid. You don't want to put like your dog or cat pet waste in there. No plastic, no glass, no coal or charcoal. It's debatable on if you should put certain weeds in there or diseased plants, depending on what kind of composting pile you're using. So if you're doing hot compost, then that will likely kill off the weed seeds and would likely and should kill off the diseased plants or any pathogens that may go into your pile. You definitely would not want to put any pesticide treated plants in there or any like treated lumber. And then we're going to talk about choosing a bin. So purchasing a bin is beneficial in the way that it takes little time to assemble and is usually aesthetically pleasing. However, these options are costly and they often make maintenance of turning more difficult. Some people have mentioned it's kind of like an out of sight, out of mind. In addition to that, that you kind of forget that it's there. But depending on what you're doing, maybe you want it to look nice. So this would be a good option. Do-it-yourself bins can also be presented in an aesthetic way, but typically in comparison to your purchased items, they are not always aesthetically pleasing. Benefits being that they're budget friendly, they can be free if you're reusing materials, and that also gives you the ability to be creative with it. You can customize it, and it's typically a little bit easier to turn these type of compost bins. So in summary, it's important to plan your space before starting, keeping a distance from garden and under shade if possible, gather brown materials before starting. It can be an easy means to reducing your waste and create a natural nutrient-rich amendment for your plants. And then I have a list of some tips and troubleshooting tricks. Remember, compost should never smell bad. So if there's a bad smell coming from it, it either does not have enough aeration or it needs brown material added and mixed in. If rodents are a problem, make sure you're adding green material to the center of your pile and covering it with brown material. You can also set rat traps near the pile, which can serve as a warning to if these are becoming a nuisance or becoming an issue. Versus helping reducing the current problem. You can even plan to start with elevated rotating compost bins, which will deter rodents, though you would want to use consideration as that method would require more watering because it will dry out faster. Other consideration for elevated compost bins is that you're not going to get it's going to be a little bit harder for like those natural ground dwelling microorganisms or macroorganisms to get into that pile and help decompose it. If your pile is damp and warm only in the middle, then this means that your pile is too small and you may consider adding a cover that still allows air to pass through. Now, if you're having a problem with your pile not heating up, this can be a sign that it is not well insulated if it's during colder months, or that it is too small. It can also be a sign that there's not enough nitrogen, oxygen, and or moisture. So, and then the other reason it may not be heating up is maybe it's done. Maybe it's already gone through all the stages and it's ready for you to play. Another frequent problem here is fire ants, often due to the pile being too dry, not hot enough, the food's too close to the surface. But some ways to remedy this is orange oil, as it will kill the ants and it creates a barrier up to 24 hours. When applying, make sure that you don't have rain forecasted. But it can be as simple as just grabbing some orange essential oil, adding a few drops to a bucket of water, or you could even boil some oranges in some water and then add that to the pile once it's cooled. And lastly, never leave a pile of greens out too long, especially in the sun. This will create a stinky anaerobic mess that is not fun to clean nor to add to the pile. Okay, ways to apply your compost. You can do compost tea by filling a bucket of water, putting that finished compost into like a burlap sack, and then soaking that in that bucket of water and placing a bubbler in there for 24 to 48 hours. You want to make sure that you're protecting this from light and use it within the time range mentioned, as the idea is to introduce those beneficial microorganisms and nutrients. And then because of those beneficial organisms, spraying compost tea on plants increases the variety of microbes, which diminishes pathogens, acting as a natural remedy for common plant disease. Compost can also be used as an amendment by mixing it with your potting soil. You can also sprinkle it on top of your garden and around the base of your plants. And then just a fun fact here, did you know that compost introduces microbes to plants, fruits, and vegetables we eat, which helps improve our gut health and our immune system? And then this just details maybe once you're a little bit more experienced with composting, you might want to start to tailor your pile to your plant. So if you're using more so for your perennials, shrubs, trees, they prefer fungally dominated compost, which can be created by maintaining a pile rich in brown material, providing cooler temperatures to fungi to thrive. Whereas your annuals, such as vegetable plants and flowers, prefer bacterially dominated compost that is rich in green material. So an easy way to think of that is that plants naturally make the kind of compost that they desire. So trees drop leaves and branches, whereas your vegetable plants drop their fruits, assuming they're not eaten. Thank you guys so much. I hope this course brought some new knowledge that you were unaware of and helps you with your composting journey if you're already on one, or gives you the tools that you need to get started. If you are interested in becoming a master gardener, cannot recommend enough taking one of the courses by Melissa. She was fantastic. So hope you guys have a great day. I will be available for questions. You can put down in the comments or at our next plant swap. I am happy to answer them.